Okay, what's going on, everybody? My name is Mangg. Welcome back to Hanging with Mangg. Huh. Well, we were supposed to be playing some Messenger here, but it seems to have just frozen up. So that's good. Possibly because I still have some, like, randomizer installed. Yeah, okay. Well, I guess just a second then. Anyways, yeah, Hanging with Mangg. Doesn't really matter what we play. Not a big factor at all. As I mostly just sit here and yap, and then, like, halfway through, I pretty much just, like, pause the game anyways and sit here so I can yap more, so none of it matters too much. Usually I try and play something that I have been playing recently, but I really am kind of struggling. Just, I don't know. I've been mostly doing a lot of solo RPG stuff and general TTRPG stuff of, like, reading modules and reading rule books and supplements and just and articles online and stuff. And so yeah, it hasn't been a lot of video games. I can't seem to find something that I'm latching onto. But that's neither here nor there, I suppose. As usual, it seems a little loud. But anyways. This week on this channel, we had Dawn of War. Plenty of Dawn of War. There's a lot of Dawn of War, actually, in the future. I say that every week. I recorded a lot of it. It's very weird for me to be so into an RTS like that, but I was. There's also more old school D&D games. Now we're on Eye of the Beholder 1 and 2. No Eye of the Beholder 3, because I just hear bad things about it. Yeah. So that's that. Recorded a lot of solo RPG stuff. Like 20-some videos. So for people that aren't into that, I'm sorry. I don't know when it'll be uploaded, but it will be. People that are into that, great. So am I. I might even record more. Two Brothers Play, we pretty much finished Convergence, or, you know, our time with Convergence. And we'll probably go back to it at some point, maybe in like a year or something. It was a lot of fun. I had more fun doing that than when we just played Elden Ring normally. And then we moved on last night to Factorio Warp Drive Machine. So that'll definitely be what's happening this week. And that's pretty much it. We're on the Exploring series. I put out part 2 of Ergophobia. Not, you know, and really not a super amount of views. For one reason or another. But Yossi, the author, was very pleased with it. So that's always good. The author on your side. And then I went on hiatus. I've been on hiatus all week now. It's been pretty great. Especially like Friday. Friday is normally my big editing day. I never do anything else on Friday but just work on exploring series. Cancel all engagements. You know, you have to decline. I decline everything because it's like, nope, Friday is work day. That's it. But this week, you know, I was just able to go out to dinner for my mom's 70th birthday, and it was all good. And yeah, vacations are nice. So tomorrow, then, I'll be putting out the combined video on existential abatement, which was over a year ago. I did those videos December of 2023, and then I didn't put out a combined video for that because it was just, I had just put out the videos. Just like I'm not going to put out a combined video for Ergophobia until next year, next January. So existential abatement, and then Maslow's fire, and then 8-Ball, and the fratricide tale. I believe those are the 4. And so the month will end then with fratricide, which I think is pretty good, because almost certainly the next thing I'll be doing in February is the Bone Proposal, which just came out today. It is massive. It's going to be like at least 6 parts. Probably just 6 parts, I would imagine. But it's a big one. It's going to be the channel for a while, which, you know, I think it's pretty good. I think that's a good thing. We'll see. Yeah, so that's all that for that channel. Not a whole lot to say otherwise. I've already been this way. I don't know why I'm walking along instead. Anyways, whatever. So now is when I mostly talk about RPGs. I always got quite a bit to say. So, you know, last Saturday, I started up a new campaign with my family with Shadow the Weird Wizard, and they immediately went into a little dungeon called the Jeweler's Sanctum. And they didn't finish it last week. They got a good way through it. But, you know, everyone enjoyed it for the most part. The feedback that I got was that everyone had a lot of fun, and that's good. That's what you want. So everyone enjoys it. This week we continued that campaign, and it was a little rougher. They did finish up the dungeon. They did finish up the dungeon, but didn't seem to go as fun for everybody finishing up that dungeon as like the first half of it was. It started with the fact that none of them could remember like anything from the first half of the dungeon, and last week none of them could remember anything that happened. And they have only one person that takes notes, just one, and he frequently cannot read his own handwriting, and he writes obviously very like shorthand notes, which is great if you remember what the shorthand notes mean. But if you write just a random phrase on your notebook, assuming that you're going to remember what that all means, and then you don't, it's basically pointless. And that's frequently the case. Hey, Tatsu. So yeah, I wish all of them took notes. That would be good if we could make that happen. In lieu of that, I wish a couple of them took notes, and they could then maybe corroborate some stuff, fill in the blanks. I also wish they could just remember stuff. A good example is that, you know, I give them every session one question for God, where they can ask me anything they want about the campaign, the session, whatever, and I will answer as truthfully and completely as I can. So they ended the last session by asking me what was in this chained and locked casket on the ground in front of them. I'm like, all right, you know what? I'll just answer as fully as I can and say there's a note inside that reads Moreland, hands off, and there's 5 cursed rings. Hey, Smart J. Fuck. And my brother-in-law wrote down Moreland, hands off. That was it. Fuck. And so they started the session, and they remembered that there was this box here, and they're like, oh yeah, how are we gonna get in the box? We have a key, right? I think we have a key, blah, blah, blah. How are we gonna get in the box? Basically, no mention whatsoever of the fact that they had asked about this and knew what was inside of it. And the fact that it's just cursed rings that they don't have any interest in. And should, you know, it was basically me just telling them, like, hey, there's nothing here you want. You can just ignore this. But they asked at the... This is Time Spinner. So... Yeah, they completely forgot. And so they eventually... got in the crate. They used their key that they had found on it. They got in. And they found the note that said Moreland, hands off. And I could tell that my brother-in-law was a little confused by this, because he had written that down. So how would he have written that down if they had never opened the box? But he didn't really say anything. And then they find the 5 rings, and I just say, yeah, there's 5 rings in there. And Lego, you know, he immediately takes it and starts putting them in his backpack. And this is when I had to just, like, I had to just stop the game. And I'm like, all right, this is... Like, I'm just disappointed, is all. That's it. And I told them, like, okay, really, just big thing here. If you're going to ask the question for God for the session, and you're going to ask it right at the end of a session so you can maybe act on it next time, write that down. Please write down the answer that I give you. It will help you a lot. And then my sister said that she kind of remembered that, but she thought that this was a different box, chained and padlocked to the ground. This is the caliber of players I'm working with here. So, Lego ended up ditching the cursed rings then and taking them out of his backpack. You know, they're only cursed if you put them on, obviously. But you wouldn't put on a cursed ring. There are things you can maybe do with it. I think his big plan was to get them decursed, and then he was thinking like a video game where you remove the curse, you purge the curse, and then they're like magic items that you can use. They have a, you know, you purify them. But really, that's doesn't happen in D&D. There can be tainted items, like a tainted holy relic or something that needs to be purified, but that's like usually made pretty clear, or it's like a focal point of a quest or something. Cursed rings and cursed items are just fucking cursed items. So I had to explain that. Anyways, eventually they checked out a few more rooms. They did get some loot. And then they're like, well, I don't know, we got this envelope for the guy. You know, the guy that hired them. They found an envelope with his name written on it. So they're like, well, we'll just take this to him, you know, and that'll be it. And so they take it to him, and, you know, he's like, well, you know, obviously you didn't... He didn't solve the problem. I can still hear the giant spider singing down in the basement. So, you know, you still didn't solve my problems. And he wasn't giving them a reward or anything, but the envelope that they gave him did have a magic ring in it. And he said, well, I'll give this to you, but you kind of have to finish the job. Otherwise, you know, they're just kind of stealing from him. So they go back in there, and they're like, well, I mean, we just have to kill the spider and the rat queen? We're just gonna kill them? And so then I had to explain again, like, no, I mean, this is an old school module, right? Or it's written in an OSR style. The intention is never, you have to kill something. The modules in the game wasn't written that way. There's no incentive 98% of the time to kill something. So, yeah, I try to make it pretty clear that they don't have to kill it. There are other ways to get what they want, but they struggle thinking of other things and other ways. They really struggle with it. Idea for a session: a cursed town that everyone was turned into cats. If the players rest in town, they also turn into cats. How to turn back and end the curse is up to you. I do think that is a pretty good idea. I do think that is pretty fun. The only issue that I would see right out the gate is how do you make sure that they spend the night? I guess, like, you could lean towards it, like, okay, suddenly the weather, you know, like they're traveling across country and suddenly the weather takes a real turn for the worse, but through the doom and gloom nearby, they do see a village. That's still no guarantee that they'll spend the night at the inn, because, I assume no one is running the inn. So the place is just essentially abandoned and filled with cats. But I do think definitely a handful of my players would really enjoy that sort of plot. So they, I think they went, yeah, they went to the Rat Queen. And they knew about the sort of bracelet on her wrist, and Lego was quite adamant that it was making her intelligent. And so the plan was basically to just, like, get her to extend her wrist. They were going to offer her up more alcohol to get her to extend her wrist, and then they were just going to slip it off. And they did, and she reverted to just like a normal giant rat. And then fought them, and so we had a little combat, and it was pretty easy. Blah, blah, blah. Then they went over to the giant spider, and the plan was they wanted, like, my sister was convinced that the giant spider was a girl that was trapped in spider form, and if they just, she found like a flute in another part of the dungeon, and she was convinced, fully convinced, if she just plays this flute, the spider will go back to normal. You know, she's very much like a fairy tale, you know, mystical sort of player that wants, like, all that sort of stuff to happen. And I just am so far from that as a DM that I really struggle. Like, maybe I should have just had it be a girl that got turned into a spider and just needed this flute to be played. That would have made my sister happy. Would that have made everyone happy? I don't know. Would it have made me happy? Not really. All right, you think of it. You think of it. So eventually, I think they just wanted to, like, scare the spider or attack. They just started attacking it, pretty much. My mom fired an arrow or something, and it missed, and then my sister tossed a torch up at it, and then it went aggro and dropped down on her, and she narrowly avoided it. And then my nephew used a lullaby scroll that he found to try and put it to sleep, and I literally just ran lullaby as written. In his defense, he didn't study the scroll, so I didn't tell him exactly the spell effects. I just told him it's a lullaby scroll, and if you study it, you know, you can find out what it does exactly, and he didn't. So he just cast lullaby, and it only works on targets with a pretty low amount of health, and this was a big giant spider, so it just, all it did was weaken it temporarily. And so then that did help a little bit, because they wanted to slip its collar off of it, and that did help them do that. And they also tried to shove it into a spiked pit, and it did help with that. So it wasn't a bad use of the spell, all things considered. Okay, they're tasked to get supplies or important person from this cat town. They get there by sundown, and so they must rest. Still thinking, what edition or game model? We were playing Shadow of the Weird Wizard. So they ended up just fighting the spider and getting it down to like 2 health, and then it fled into the darkness. I could have had them just kill it. I mean, I you know, they're generally not satisfied when things run away, which is understandable, I suppose. But it's not the DM's job to just do things that are, or make decisions that are just satisfying to players. My goal is always just to create and run a realistic world and react to their actions. This creature doesn't want to die any more than they do. It would run. Sorry. And so they concluded that they kind of dealt with the problem. So they finished checking out every last room in the dungeon, and they found one room with a bunch of cages in it, and in one of the cages is a big mirror. They were very apprehensive about this mirror, because it was in a lock, it was in a cage. And so they wanted to investigate it. Actually, this was before the spider. This is before they killed the spider. They checked out this room. And, so eventually they wanted to show the mirror to the spider. They had no idea it was on the mirror. They were very clear. None of them wanted to look in the mirror. And I was like, okay, fine, you know. So they carried it, like, face down over to the spider, and they showed the spider the mirror. And it's like, okay, nothing happened. Eventually, later on, they were just like, I look in the mirror. You know, I think my sister just was like, I look in the mirror, whatever. And they see, like, sort of just this insane robed figure that's, like, babbling and rubbing his hands and stuff. And they tried a bunch of stuff to, like, talk to him, or they were like, maybe this, the jeweler, you know, the grandfather or whatever. They weren't really sure. I think one of them at least mentioned that it might be Morlin or something. And so they were mostly convinced it was the grandfather, so they took the mirror back to the guy. They're like, look, here's your grandfather. He's like, I have no idea who this guy is. But I don't like it. Please take this mirror with you. And so, before long, one of them ended up just smashing the mirror, and the guy tumbles out of it. And, they start talking to him, and it becomes clear pretty quickly that he's just, like, lost his mind, you know. He's pretty far gone. And he was in this mirror for like 70 years or something. He's pretty gone. And so then my nephew, they realize that this is Morlin. And so my nephew pulls out the book that he had picked up, which has the title on it that's like Morlin's Marvelous Magic. And I'm like, okay, as soon as you pull out the book, his eyes go wide, and he's like, my book! My book! And he sort of reaches for it. And my nephew's like, nuh-uh. And he just holds it away from him, you know? Like, okay, you try and keep it away from him. He like tackles you, he punches you, tackles you, and he's gonna like try and strangle you. Because he's lost his mind, he just wants his book. And so they became very convinced, as a whole group, that this guy was the most nefarious wizard to ever exist, and he was going to use that book to obliterate the planet and take control of all their minds and have sex with their butts and stuff, and it was all very tragic. It was going to be awful if they ever let this guy get a hold of this book. And so they, like, restrain him, they tie him up with ropes, you know, and my nephew is like, okay, I want to look at this book for a minute. I just want, what's in this book? And I'm like, okay, well, it appears to be a very novice spell book. Contains the spell for light and lullaby. This sort of softened their thoughts a little bit that this guy was some evil mastermind wizard. But my nephew still didn't want to give him the book, because he's like, why does he want this book so bad? We don't trust him. We don't trust him at all. They don't really trust anyone. Which is funny for events that happen later in the session. And so then eventually my nephew throws the book at the guy, at his face. And I'm like, okay, it just knocks him out. And then they're like, okay, we're done here. And the guy that hired them thanks them and gives him the ring that his grandfather gave him, which is a ring of protection. And they were pretty pleased with that. When I say they, I mean Lego. And then they leave and they're like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? They were still carrying this guy, this wizard guy, and they're like, well, what are we gonna, you know, somebody's got to know about this guy. And it's like, okay, you know, he said that he was in there for like 70 years. They sort of knew that. So no one knows who this guy is. He's a tragic figure. If they had just let him read his book, the module says that it would, like, restore his sanity and his memories. But no, they couldn't do that. So they just, like, let him run free. And I'm like, okay, he like Kermit runs into the woods, babbling insanely. Great. Really heroic stuff they did there. And then they had to decide what they were going to do next. The big decision about, okay, they did this dungeon, it's all done, it's all wrapped up. What do we do next? And this started quite the discussion. And they went over all their options like 5 times, you know, and it's just there's no leader, no one can make a decision. No one can just be like, look, I'm putting my foot down, we're going here. It's all just like, well, let's put it to a vote, and no, that's dumb. We don't want to do that. We should really do this. Oh, and then just on and on. And they, you know, a number of them did feel strongly about taking care of the raiders, raiding their village. And it's funny, because when I made this little hex crawl campaign, you know, I put that in there, right next to the starting town. That was like the main plot point, was that their home village, where they're born and raised, they've lived here for decades, this is their people, so on and so forth. It's getting raided constantly by this band of raiders. I thought, when I put that in there, I'm like, okay, this is priority numero fucking uno. Like, nothing else really takes precedence over there. And surely they're not going to leave the village while that's still in play. That is exactly what they did, ladies and gentlemen. That's exactly what they did. They decided to just go west. And the reason they wanted to go west was because they got some treasure from that little dungeon, and they went to the general store in their farming village, and the guy didn't really want to buy the uncut gems that they had. And so he suggested, well, you know, there's several other towns nearby, you probably could sell them off. There's, you know, the big city to the southwest. There's another town by the swamps to the west, Illmire, so on and so forth. And he's like, you know, it's probably like a 3-day hike to the west, if that's what you're interested in. And that's what they were interested in, because they gotta get their money. They gotta sell their treasure. They started hiking west. And so I started, you know, I grabbed my package, my pamphlet of papers for the evils of Illmire. So I'm like, okay, this could be fine. I'm not really well read on it, and, you know, we'll see how it goes. And then they're hiking, we do some rolls for random encounters, things like that, and I explained that, like, you know, they could spend part of their day if they wanted to, like, explore the hex that they're in to try and find something of interest. They weren't fucking interested in that. The only thing that mattered was selling their treasure so that they could get money. What did they want to do with the money? They had no idea. There was no clear consensus on that. They just want money. They're tasked with finding a missing important NPC last heard of in this town. They arrive by sundown, noticing only cats in this town. As they try to investigate the situation, it's sundown, they're tired and choose to rest to continue early in the morning, find themselves turned into cats. Plot continues to your discretion. I think that is as reasonable a plot to get things going as you could ask for. I definitely could throw that plot and that location into my hex crawl. I would just have to, you know, and this is sort of what I'm talking about as being the issue, is like, it's... Yeah, I'll go more into that in a bit, but there is still an issue, but it's more personal to my group. So anyways, as they're continuing on, I'm like, okay, well, they're crossing near the this tower that I put there on the map, and that could be interesting. I figure, you know, they probably would see the tower. There's like lightning clouds above it, so I'm gonna mention this. And so that's basically just the module for Lamentations of the Flame Princess, Tower of the Stargazer, which is meant as a very introductory little module. I'm like, okay. So they get intrigued enough to go after it. And they go to the tower, and they start getting into the tower. And as written, it's a pretty dangerous module. Not as much for weird wizard characters, obviously, but there's a lot of effects in there that are just kind of like, you're dead. And I honestly ran it pretty much as was written. They could have died at multiple points. But to be honest, and I think even unbeknownst to them, they did a lot of correct things. So it was kind of startling that like, okay, yeah, I mean, that works. Good job. That sort of thing. Other times they survived by sheer fucking luck. But they start going through the dungeon. They get to a locked door at the top of one of the staircases. And they're like, okay. And they see blood kind of trickling out of the keyhole. And they're like, we don't like this. They thought there's just a wall of blood on the other side. I felt like maybe saying, like, okay, if there was a literal fucking wall of blood on the other side of this door, it would not be trickling through the keyhole. But, I mean, the effect is magical, and if they bash open the door, there is a big deluge of blood that sends them spiraling down the staircase. But, you know, so they were right, but not correctly correct. The issue is getting the players interested without getting railroaded. And you are making the assumption, as a normal person would, that my players are not interested in being railroaded. And they end up going down in the basement through a trapdoor they found. And down there, they find, like, a laboratory with, like, a human cadaver on the table. And they find a bunch of crates with, like, body parts in them. And the funny thing was that the crates were all randomly labeled based on its random table. And they checked a few crates. So we rolled a few times on the random table. I said to them that it's a random table that we're generating on. But they generated a few. And they were all body parts. So it was like the sternum of a soldier who collects happiness. Or something like that. It was like the random ones they got. And they became very convinced that all of these crates contained body parts of evil people. Because the random rolls they got were all sounded like very evil things that these soldiers and merchants did. But it was random, so I don't think that was necessarily the intention. And so they became convinced that this tower belonged to a wizard that operated and, you know, did all this to bad people, you know, evil people. So, okay, he's a good guy, you know? So they ignored, like, the cadaver on the table and blah, blah, blah. And they entered another room and they found a bunch of cells that had, like, rotting corpses in it that animated as soon as they opened the door and, like, were shouting, "Free us! Free us!" But again, they were like, well, these guys are evil fucks. We're not gonna free them. The really funny part came when they found a series of mirrors. And their earlier trepidation about that other mirror and how that ended meant that now they were not afraid of mirrors at all. And so my aunt just started looking in mirrors. The first mirror she looked in lowered her will score by 1 permanently. Most people, most players, this would dissuade them very heavily from ever looking into another mirror. My aunt immediately looked into another mirror. And then other people were just like, yeah, this is fun, because they were rolling will checks to avoid the bad effects, but they all were pretty much succeeding after that. Except for my aunt, who then, like, went comatose for 20 minutes after looking into a mirror. Fuck. And, my sister, I think, summed it up pretty nicely. While looking into a mirror. She was about to look into a mirror, and she said, oh, I don't care if I die or anything. I just want something to happen. Now, she didn't realize it, but that is one of the most fucking tragic things a DM can ever hear. For, like, multiple reasons. I don't care if I die, I just want something to happen. This stems from one of 2 players. Either a player that is like a chaos gremlin and just likes to interact with the world to cause chaos and make things happen, and this is a consistent thing. Or it's from a player that is bored beyond belief with how the session or the campaign is going and just needs something to liven up their soul so they can have fun. My sister lies in the latter camp, I'm afraid. But, you know, they had their fun with the mirrors, and my aunt's character went unconscious for a while. So they moved on, and they went back upstairs, because they're like, they found some other key or something. No, they didn't find a key. No, they were just like, okay, we're gonna go back upstairs to the blood door. And they knocked, the key for that door was in the keyhole, and you're supposed to use clever thinking, but this is a high-powered game, so my brother just used telekinesis to get the key and slide it under the door to them. And they open the door, which doesn't trigger the deluge of blood. And in the next room, they find a wizard. And he's very clearly like a classical pointy hat and robe wizard with a long beard. And he's standing in the middle of a circle of salt. And he speaks to them immediately and says how happy he is that they're here. And he's trapped in this circle. He's been studying how to contain demons, and he was distracted by his assistant. And now he's trapped here. He's been trapped here for years. And he is so glad they're here because they can free him now. And all they have to do is just brush aside some of the salt. And, you know, I roleplayed him like the module suggested, like kind of a senile, doddering old man, you know? Like, he's definitely putting on, like, a farce. He's putting on this display that he's just, you know, kind of the old man that accidentally got trapped here. And my players ate it up, and they were like, oh, of course we'll help you, absolutely. And they immediately just brush aside some of the salt, and he's like, you know, he can't even believe it. And I think he promised them a bit of a reward as well, if they just free him. And so he's like, well, excellent, well, I'm just gonna go to the treasure vault and get you a reward. And they're like, okay, we'll wait in the lobby. And he's like, excellent, you know, and he's just so happy. And the module is very specific about this. Like, if they annoy him at all, or if they ask for any more money, or if they ask any questions or whatever, he just immediately, like, drops the facade and slaughters them because he's a high-level wizard or whatever. But they didn't. They were very courteous and very happy to help and blah, blah, blah. And happy, you know, I'm like, okay, I'll push it a little further, and I'll say that, like, as he's walking downstairs, he's like, I think 20 silver pieces is more than enough, you know? just to kind of like lay it on a little thick. But no, they were still just very pleased to help out. They were so happy that they like won, you know, they solved it. So he comes back later and he gives them a sack of 20 silver pieces, and they're about to go on their way. And then they start to ask a couple questions. I don't remember the first question. I don't remember the first question. I think it was Lego. I think he asked some question, and I was like, okay. He's got them in the doorway. They're about to leave. He's gonna, you know, he might, if this was right after they freed him, maybe he would have blasted him, but he's gonna give them a little moment here. But I mentioned it, he's like, he grits his teeth, and he's like almost pained a little bit that he has to explain himself or whatever to you. And so this was like, oh boy, we better not. And then they're like, I think they asked about the nearest town as well. And he's like, okay, fine. You know, he'll strain himself to answer that. And then I think Lego was about to ask one more question right before he left. And then everyone else talked him out of it because they could tell, like, no, that's not a good idea. This guy does not really want to talk to us. So he dropped it and they left. Like, okay, damn good thing you did. He was going to ask about the bodies in the basement. I'm like, oh, that would have immediately... He would have fucking cast Meteor on your ass or something. Time stop. And that's basically where we ended the session. And I'm like, okay, you know... afterwards, then, yeah, I don't know. I was having a bit of a crisis of just thinking, like, is this campaign the best way to run a campaign for them? Of just completely open-ended, no goals, no big heroism, no objectives. They're just kind of wandering. Is that really the best thing to do? I could run a D&D 5th edition campaign or a Pathfinder Adventure Path, you know, and they would be guided to each location and do heroic things and fight a bunch of stuff. I talk about this like every single time I discuss DMing for them. I'm just like, I don't understand what kind of players they are. I thought players fell into relatively neat groups, you know? There's like the players that really like the role-playing aspect. They want to get into their characters. They want to live in this fantasy world and you know, live out a game as someone other than themselves and get into these characters. None of them are like that. Not a single one. Then there's like the min-maxers that want to study every rulebook, every supplement. They want to maximize their character's mechanical potential, you know, to dominate every battle as much as they can. Not one of them is like that. Lego he leans a little bit towards that, but definitely not. He doesn't read enough for that to really be the case. Then there's like the storytellers or the story, you know, fanatics. The ones that become engrossed in the overarching story and characters of the world, you know, and they kind of want to treat it like an incredible book or something that they get to be a part of. And so they're, you know, the meticulous note takers, and they're the ones that are always fascinated with every NPC and plot development. Not a one of them is like that. They can't, not only one takes notes and he doesn't even really remember his notes. You know, and anytime we have any sort of semblance of a plot, they forget completely the entire plot, start to finish, the next week, you know. Then there's like problem solvers. That's what I am. I play RPGs because I want to be handed an impossible problem and all the possible tools that I can think of to try and solve it. I love that. Not one of them is like that. Because I don't think they really care that much about coming up. I don't know. I think they would love to come up with some plan and then enact it and it works and they're like, yes, we're geniuses. The problem is none of them can come up with a plan that's worthy of anything. Like my sister's, her plan to deal with the raiders was to take all the treasure that they just got in the dungeon and give it to the raiders and tell them, you can have this if you leave our village alone. And Lego pretty much openly just mocked her for this plan. That the thieves would just be happy taking the treasure and going on their way. And Lego is fairly correct. That is a likely ridiculous plan. Then there's players that want to just explore. You know, they see open spaces on this map, and they just want to uncover everything. You know, they want to like 100% the map and find everything there is to see there, because that's exciting to them. You know, always just going over the next hill and finding something new. My players, definitely not like that. I can tell because I gave them the blank hex crawl map with just their starting hexes filled in. Not one of them mapped out where they were going and like filled in the hexes as they go, or put down like, oh, there's that tower to the north of us, let me put that on a map. So, you know, they don't really care. Then there's like just the combat enjoyers. They're not min-maxers. They don't want to read and optimize everything, but they just want a beer and pretzels game where they can just throw some dice, get into combat. They don't have to solve problems. They just roll dice, and the combats they know are always going to be pretty balanced. And, you know, this is a lot of 5th edition players, I'm sure. And it's like, yeah, we're just here for some fun combat, because that's exciting. It's, you know, it's more like a board game, blah, blah, blah. They don't have to think too much. I do think I have a couple players like that, but unless you have most of the players like that, and you have players, if you have players that don't like combat at all, that really clashes quite a bit. There's probably some other types that I'm forgetting, but I know those are the main types of players. So I just have this mishmash of people that mostly just want like wacky hijinks, and they want to be entertained. They don't want to have to think too much because they can't think that much. They don't want to read anything because they don't like to read. They don't enjoy dungeons that much because dungeons mostly are either problem solving or combat, and they don't really enjoy too much of those two things. And they don't like story that much or characters because their mainly concern is just trying to get money. But they also don't know what they want money for, because that would require either thinking or reading the books. You see my issue? And it's a bummer for me, because I really only have fun if all 6 of them are having fun. And that's rare. And I also don't want to put on a one-man show just to entertain them. That's not my job. So... So I was having this crisis of just, like, this DMing crisis of what the fuck do I do with this group? And I talked to my mom, and she's just like, you know, you're overthinking it way too much, you know. Everyone stayed last night for, like, 4 hours. No one said they wanted to go, or no one said they should wrap this up. Everyone's going to be excited to come back next week, you know, blah, blah, blah. She's probably right. I do definitely overthink all this, because I'm trying to just craft this perfect game. I'm trying to figure out this perfect RPG game for this specific group, and that's just impossible. So I should just do my best, and that's all I can do. Footnote, the NPCs cannot be revealed until after the curse is lifted, because having been turned into a cat, people forgot their name. All they know is the person is missing. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I like that. Very Cats of Ulthar. Feel that as a player. Yeah, it's just... So, like, I was having a crisis, like, you know, fuck it, maybe I just abandon this whole hex crawl thing, because, you know, what's the point? And I just run Rime of the Frost Maiden or Horde of the Dragon Queen for 5th edition, because I don't think they care that much if they're just told where to go, and just like, hey, there's a bunch of raiders here, you need to fight them. And if I just tell them, like, hey, if you want, you don't need a clever plan, you can just go in there and fight them. You know? I don't know. I think they'd simultaneously be a little bummed out that they don't need a clever plan, while also glad that they don't need a clever plan. But my mom convinced me to just give it another week at least of this Hexcrawl campaign, because no one is really despising it or anything, so just let them continue roaming, see where they get up to, and then, you know, decide next week. I think the biggest problem with my Hexcrawl campaign, and probably most sandbox Hexcrawl campaign, there's no overarching plot. There's no big bad, there's no big calamity, there's no big heroism thing that needs doing. Basically, I've just sprinkled a lot of like modules and little scenarios around a map, and that's what a Hexcrawl is. But that means literally they're just wandering around trying to get money for a reason that they're unclear on. And that was my main thing of like, well, if I just ran a D&D campaign or something, or an adventure path, there's going to be a big plot. There's going to be heroic things that need doing, and they're the ones to do it, and they're told where to do these heroic things. For the most part. I mean, I think a lot of pre-written campaigns use hex crawls or point crawls to make it a little sandboxy. My biggest argument for myself against running a pre-written thing was when we did Lost Mines of Phandelver, and they could not keep track of the plot of that campaign, that adventure, at all. They completely forgot basic plot points throughout the entire adventure. And eventually they just, like, gave up on it. So, you know. It's just, yeah. It's all a little frustrating for me because my normal gaming group gave up on RPGs, like, completely. They only play board games. Which I'm not really that into. Like, I'd rather play RPGs by myself. The only group that I have is my family, which I have to DM for because none of them could ever DM because they don't want to read a rulebook. And I don't like strangers enough to play in a random online game or anything like that. Because every time I've done that, it's been fucking disastrous. So, really, yeah, mostly just kind of RPG for myself. Yeah. If I ever need plots or campaign stuff, I'll let you know. Yeah, I mean, I don't come up with much, like, at all. Most of what I do is pre-written stuff. For the solo recently, like the solo videos, I've actually been turning to ChatGPT quite a bit just to, like, throw some ideas out there or spur some creativity. I found that's been pretty great, actually. I would never use ChatGPT to, like, run an RPG for myself. That would be just horrible, but just to like help with some creative ideas, it's been pretty nice. Anyways, that's about all I have to say about that. So we'll see what the next week brings. They were heading towards Ilmire, so I'm probably gonna just, you know, read up on that a couple times, prep for how that's gonna go. I thought about maybe trying to steer them in a different direction towards some other module, but I don't know. Ilmire could be interesting. It's like a whole it's a hex crawl in itself. It's like a whole campaign in itself. But it's got a cult operating in this swampy village and taking over the town, and the players have to kind of suss it out and figure out what's going on. But there's also like 17 dungeons scattered across the hex crawl. It's very highly regarded, so I'm kind of interested to try it out. Yeah, thanks, Smart J. I always appreciate having someone here to chat with. So yeah, this week, more Dawn of War, more old D&D RPGs on an exploring series, Existential Abatement, all 3 parts combined into one. Even people that probably watched that over a year ago might want to rewatch it. That was a good one. And that's that. So, my name is Mangg. This has been Hanging with Mangg. I'll see you fine folks next week.